Okay, so yeah, this is something new I want to try. We can jokingly call it the patch 10.10 post mortem. Ha ha ha. But I think it's worthwhile to not only when we do patch rundowns talk about why we're making changes, but also look back at some of the changes we made and figure out, were they good, were they correct, were they not. So I'm going to run through the patch actually and talk about, am I happy with how the changes went, or was it a mistake to ship them? So let's skip the hot fixes for a second. Niko boxes, I think this has just been a positive for the game. This has been good. The tie system has been really good, other than the bug. It's unfortunate. Press F11 to hide my browser. Thank you. Great. Whoever said that, thank you. The ties has been a really good system. I think that's been received pretty well. There is some negative with it, that like the feeling of being inside a world and running away has been a little bit of a loss there, but yeah, I think that's overall it's been good, and with the bug fixed in 10.15, I think we'll be in a good spot. Littler legends removed. I think that was good. I think it's just, we're hearing a lot less complaints, so that's just nice to hear, and wasn't really adding a huge amount of depth to the game. Dwarf Planet, I think, has actually been good. It's definitely taken some people some time to adjust to it, and I think the art we're using is like not ideal. It's a little bit in your face, but it does make some more interesting builds work. Gangplank is actually quite good on that galaxy. Mech survives a little bit more. It's definitely not one of our like top tier galaxies by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it was a good experiment, and I think it's been good to bring back the set one board and show people what it was like. Okay, Star Guardians. This change overall was good. A lot of the Star Guardians are now being played outside of the Star Guardian comp. Before, it really used to just be, in order for any of the Star Guardians to be played, you had to be playing 6 Star Guardian. But now we're actually seeing some more innovative comps, like the Star Guardian Protector build, Sorcerers a little bit, even just like Syndra as a carry to some extent. That was the goal, and so that did well. So this, I think, was positive. The Poppy change didn't change anything. No big deal there. The Zoe change has actually been fine. This one... This is the one that I'm like, maybe we went too far. Maybe. Niko Protector with Star Guardian is a lot of CC. It's a lot of CC. Would this have been better at like 50 out of 125? I think 50 out of 125 probably would have been a safer thing to do here, so that she's not casting quite as much. I think giving her an extra 50 off was a bit aggressive on a patch, and so... Again, one of the highlights you're going to see from this patch is there were a lot of changes. We could have just been less aggressive and pulled back. So, doesn't mean we're changing it now. It's just looking back. Syndra, this one obviously was incorrect. We hotfixed it. But this is a really good example of one of the reasons why I personally am struggling to take vacation sometimes. I was playing PBE that Sunday. Definitely agreed with Saint and a few other people that it was overpowered, but because I was on vacation, I didn't poke anybody about it. Had I poked somebody, we could have caught that. So it's just lesson learned for me. I'm glad we tried it at 40. There were really 2 routes we could have gone. We could have gone 40 and like cut the spell damage in half so that she had to like rapidly build up, or 50 as it is now with the current spell damage. And I think both work. But clearly 40 was another example of a mistake. Soraka change, didn't change much. Janna, this one I think is both good and bad. It has been good because our goal of trying to get Janna to be in more comps has worked. Like, Janna's a very powerful champion. I do think Ace called it out correctly that the 80 to 70 start was maybe a little incorrect. Had this been 20 out of 100, probably would have been better. Having Janna be playable outside of Star Guardian comps is really good, though. So, but yeah, I think this probably should have just been 20 out of 100. So, other than that, it didn't really change much. She was already good, and I think people were just figuring out how good she'd be. Celestial. I think the 6 change was great. I think the 6 change was just good. It's like 6 Celestial is a high roll that you can sometimes play. Not realistically, though. I think the 4 change is fine. I don't think that would hurt anything. The 2 change I'm split on, because it's not really incentivizing splashing 2 Celestial so much as it is just buffing comps that happen to be using it. Darkstar benefited from this a lot. Protector benefited from this a lot. I'm not sure I would have shipped this again looking back. This one seems a little rough. The Cyber one, this is an example where I think people are going to look at this change and go, hey, you shouldn't have done that. It nerfed Cybers. I actually still think this was correct. I think this was important for Cyber in the future, and I'd probably still ship this one. I think the bigger crime is the things around this change rather than this change in particular. So I actually would still ship this. Sorcerer, I don't think this changed much. I'm glad we shipped it because I think otherwise Sorcerer would have been even stronger. The 4 Sorc comps that we're seeing in the Star Guardian world. But there are other parts to the Sorc that I think would have been a little rough. But this change in particular I think was worth shipping. Okay. Jarvan. So let's talk about Jarvan. Again, clearly not correct because we had to hotfix it. I really, like I said, it drives me nuts when people are like, 4 buffs bad, should only be 1 buff. It's like, well, no, again, the number of buffs doesn't matter, right? Because if this health set at 10,000 and was 1 buff, it would have been, even worse. The number of buffs is irrelevant. But let's look at each individual one. The health buff. Should the health buff have happened? I don't think the health buff changed anything. I think it made him a little bit tankier early, but honestly, people are running Warmogs anyway, so I don't think that matters. The AD. I don't think the AD changed anything. I think I would call this an unnecessary change. Like, he probably just didn't need it. I don't think it changed the power structure much. It's just like, whatever. Obviously, this one, I think, was the big miss. I think having a Protector at 80 mana at 1 star, being able to cast repeatedly, was incorrect. Right now, we have Jarvan at 100 after the hotfix, but 80. Xin at 60, but that's kind of his identity, is like Xin gets to be the good Protector that gets to cast frequently. Rakan at 100, and Niko at 100. So I think having Jarvan be the 1 cost and have one of the better mana, I think was incorrect. So I'm glad we hotfixed the mana the way we did. The other thing is I probably shouldn't have shipped this. This was just a lot of bonus attack speed for something that really didn't need it. So realistically, if we had just deleted these 2 changes, probably would have been in a good spot. So I think that's okay. Ziya. This one's tough. I think this was a correct change. It's nice to see Ziya get played again. Honestly, Shredder being back in the meta is good. Having more diverse comps is good. And honestly, is Shredder really benefiting? Like, it's benefiting from this for sure, but like if Jarvan was in a reasonable spot, would Shredder be that big a deal? Probably not. So I think this was good. The one thing looking back is I kind of wish maybe we'd just done 0.85 instead of 0.9, just to play it a little safe. But overall, I think it's fine. Mordekaiser. So this is an example where people are like, oh my god, they buffed 5 Darkstar units. And it's like, well, honestly, like, this buff didn't do anything. This buff was a good buff. I'm glad we shipped this buff. Mordekaiser being a little stronger, great. Honestly, Jarvan being so strong pushed out Mordekaiser completely. But Mordekaiser being strong, not a big deal. This buff. I think it was correct to buff Rakan, but I think 700 was way incorrect. I think 650 would have been a much better play here. Which, again, one of the big things you're going to see from this retro is just like a lot of these levers should probably have been pulled a lot smaller. Witty said it best when we were talking about it that like there's no such thing as a small change in TFT. You can give someone 5 AD and it's not a small change. So just something to do there. Yasuo change, good. He's still not really even a champion. People don't really play him much. I think this is just a good change. It buffs Rebels, it buffs Blade Masters in a way that's not a problem. So Ashe. So here's another example where it's like we pulled 4 levers I don't think buffing Ashe was incorrect. But looking back, what I probably would have done is not ship the health buff. I think Ashe being fragile is correct. She should have a weakness, which is like cybers or burst damage. I think the attack speed was correct. I think that's good. I think the damage buff is what I would call inconsequential, but also not necessary. But I think the 3-second stun is what actually is making her an exciting unit to play. So honestly, I could have just shipped this. This is good too. Probably didn't need to ship this. Probably didn't need to ship this. So, but Ashe being a good unit now is good for the game. So like, cool. It's good to see her be used. Happy about that. Ezreal. Ezreal was basically single-handedly shutting down a lot of sorcerer comps and making blasters really strong. Honestly, this was probably the biggest nerf to Jinx buffs, to Jinx comps. Jinx getting nerfed, I don't think actually changed that much. So the attack damage nerf I think was correct, because it's like if you're going to pick Ezreal, you should get the less damage overall. So I think that part was correct. I think this probably should have just been 40. Just a slight nerf, because right now it's like the difference between those two auto attacks and Ezreal not casting is so massive. And again, this is another instance where like we pulled a lever in 2 notches when we probably should have pulled it in 1 notch. So next up is Karma. This is probably one of the underappreciated Darkstar buffs, where like I think some of our higher skill players realize that like this is doing a lot of work. Karma Xerath, Karma Jhin, Karma, plus Jarvan is like, yeah, she's strong. What's unfortunate is like it didn't really accomplish the goal of what we were trying to do, which is like, if you get Karma from a box early, do you instantly sell her? In 10-13, the answer was yes. In 10-14, the answer is probably still yes. Even though she's still really strong and really good, I think the answer is still yes. So it didn't really accomplish the goal we needed. That being said, in the end, I think this is actually still worth shipping. 50 shield at 2-star and 15% attack speed. Maybe we could have cut this one. Maybe make this something closer to like 60, 80, 150. But overall, I don't think this was that egregious. So, Niko, we already talked about a bit with the mana. I think the health change was correct, and the armor change was correct. I think, again, if I would go back, the mana change probably should have been 50-125, not 25-100. Okay, Shaco. This one is fascinating. Shaco clearly has become a good unit that people are running now. RFC, BTGA, whatever you want. Shaco's a playable unit now. And the only thing we changed was 10 mana. Did that 10 mana make a big difference? Or were people sleeping on Shaco? Or is it just everything around Shaco finally made Shaco playable? I think, honestly, looking back, this was an answer where we probably shouldn't have changed this. We probably should have been changing the things around it. The Jarvan, the Jhin, the Ashe, the comps that Shaco does well with. And yeah, we probably should have just left this alone. So this buff, while I don't think was like criminally overpowered, was just another example of like, we maybe should have just not also shipped this. Now the funny thing is, I don't think Shaco's OP by any means right now. It's just he's finally playable and finally good and has very clear weaknesses and strengths and things like that. So, and again, it just shows you how fragile our game is, right? Like 10 mana here just being massive difference. So, Syndra, one thing I'll say here is like, now that we're in the state we're in at 0 out of 50, I think these numbers are correct. 0 out of 40 and this was insane. Shouldn't have done that. Excuse me. Vayne health. I think this was correct. Vayne attack damage. This one's tough. So Vayne has one of those aggro drop properties. We saw this earlier, running the like 3-star Vayne. And like Vayne feels really weak right now. But the challenge here is that Vayne should be weak, right? Like Vayne should not be better than Jhin, ever. If Vayne is better than Jhin, we've screwed up, because Vayne gets to aggro drop and Jhin doesn't. But it is fascinating how she went from like dominating every comp to basically not played. I'm not convinced this was incorrect, but it is possible this is another example of where we should have tuned it down just 5 instead of 10. The other thing I'll call out is that Jinx also, or Vayne also lost 5 AD from the Cyber nerf. So Cyber nerf -5, this -10 is -15, and again her spell scales off AD, so that was probably incorrect. So I do think this should have been 55. Someone in chat is saying, why not change Vayne ult to 4 shots per tumble? I think that is another way to nerf her for sure. Yeah, I think that would have been another way to do it. But like I said, I'm 100% sure she needed to be nerfed. 100% sure she's in a more realistic spot. It just might be a little bit off. Vi, I actually think this change was great. I think this change was correct. 50 damage off her spell is fine. She's still a good unit. She still hurts pretty hard. I think this is just correct. Fizz, I think this change was correct. 50 damage off the spell. People are still running Fizz all day, every day. Fizz is great, just not quite as OP as he was before. Great. No problem. So here's an example I think is really funny because everyone's like, don't hit 4 or 5 levers all at once. Aurelia, we hit 5 levers using everyone's counting methodology. And honestly, this was all correct. Like, Aurelia's still what she is. She's still fine. She's a little bit better. She still struggles with exactly what she struggled with before. She's just a little less painful. So, like, these changes were correct. Imagine if we didn't make these changes. She'd be a joke. So I'm glad we made these changes. And honestly, there's more work to do. So, but again, this is where I think there's an example of, saying, oh, 3 changes bad, but here 5 changes good. Like, it's not that simple. So I would ask everyone to think that through a little bit more than just surface level counting. But yeah, so I think Aurelia's in a decent spot now. To be honest, I think she's borderline needing buffs or nerfs. It's like really close right now. But yeah, like Infiltrator Aurelia's good. Thieves Gloves Aurelia's still pretty good. So yeah. Okay, Jhin. Jhin is the exact opposite case where like Jhin went from unplayable to S tier, and we probably shouldn't have shipped all of these changes in the degree we did. I'll be honest with you, like tell you the story of how this happened. The first thing we buffed was this. We wanted to make 4th shot matter. Then we buffed this so that he could do more 4th shots. And then in our sims, he just wasn't quite performing enough, so we added this at the last minute. Probably shouldn't have added this at the last minute. Probably should have cut this. That was the mistake. I think just these 2 might have been okay. But that last bump that we did at the end probably pushed him over the edge. And then the other thing I'll say is that people did figure out pretty quickly ways to circumvent Jin's weakness, whether it be GA, Karma, Janna, various other things. So I think, yeah, people figured out it. It's good that Jhin is in the meta. We want Jhin in the meta because again, 10-13 he was basically not a unit, but clearly went too far. So, Jinx. I actually think this change was correct. I know everyone's gonna be like, "Oh, Jinx comps are unplayable." I don't think that's true. I think Soju's proven that's not true. I think this change was correct. I think Jinx is struggling because of some of the other changes around being too high, but I don't think this change was incorrect. I think this one was good. So I'm not worried about this change. I'm actually pretty happy with this. This one's tough. Actually, I'm going to talk about both these. I think both of these were probably an overreaction to the 10-13 meta without thinking about the 10-14 meta. I think we were all looking at 10-13, and we were looking like, hey, Cybers, Riven, and Stork. Those were the 3 comps everyone played. And we nerfed Cybers, and we nerfed Jinx, but there were no Stork nerfs. This comp's going to dominate. And so it was like, oh shit, we better take care of this. The reality is, by buffing the counters, we actually solved the problem without needing to nerf them, right? Jhin being meta makes Riven just go, I guess I lose. Mystic being more meta just means these comps struggle a lot. Cassiopeia. So, like, yeah, Riven is basically, like, unplayable right now, which is unfortunate. And I don't think a 25 shield nerf did that, right? Like, no one's going to say minus 25 shield and now Riven's garbage. No, thank you. I think this is just an example of where, like, the meta takes over. So, something to think about in the future. And yeah, it's just, I think everyone miscalled this one. Even the pros I talked to were like, you have to nerf Storks, otherwise it would be a Stork meta. But again, we didn't think that the counters being better would push them out. So, and then the same with Victor. Like, yeah, I think these both fall into that bucket. Lastly, we have Aurelion Sol. I think these changes were correct. Aurelion Sol is still a great champion. Someone in chat saying Aurelion Sol 1 is not a unit. You're just wrong. Aurelion Sol is a unit. Good champion. People win with games with A-Sol. So, like, this was just good. A-Sol is still a good champion and actually a little more balanced. So, like, this is just a win. I look at these as 100%. And then this one's hilarious because this one, right before we shipped, someone was like, don't ship this. This'll over-nerf Janna. I'm so glad we shipped this. Holy shit. Could you imagine if we didn't ship this? Xerath Janna would be wrecking everything. So, very glad we shipped this one. And then lastly, let's talk about Urgot. It's funny. We shipped all these changes, and the idea was to make Urgot more fair. I think we accomplished that. Urgot is now predictable. He works exactly like Caitlyn, and you know it, and you can plan around it, and you don't feel like you got cheated by bullshit randoming positioning and coin flips. So I think in that regard, we have succeeded. Again, the goal was never to make your 1-star Urgot eating your 3-star champion not feel worse. Like, that's always going to feel bad. So, didn't change that. And, I mean, people are playing Urgot. That's the crazy thing, is everyone was like, Urgot's going to be unplayable garbage and only be played with Thresh. That has not been true. People are playing Urgot. They're really chasing Urgot too. Honestly, the Polt game where he hit the early Urgot and carried with it. Like, yes. So, honestly, this is just a success, I think. I think Urgot ended up in a more healthy state. So, I think this is good. Lastly, Giant Slayer. I think this is good for the long term. It clearly has caused a lot of confusion. The number of people that messaged me and were like, Giant Slayer's not doing true damage, game is bugged. Oops. Just shows we shouldn't have shipped it in the first place. And the other thing I'll say is that, like, it definitely, it led to a lot of confusion, but the item is still good. People are still using the item, so no big deal there. And then lastly, Ionic Spark. Glad we shipped this change. Ionic Spark is now no longer a must build. It's still a good item. I think this is just good. So, yeah. Do I think Urgot is good because of Protector? No. No, Urgot is doing very well regardless of Protector. So, I mean, the P.B.A. comp alone, but, yeah. So yeah. So overall, I think the general takeaway from this is there were like 80% good changes in this patch. 80% things that pushed the game in the right way. But there were like 4 or 5 really big key misses that killed it and made this patch a little rough. I think, obviously, the Syndra buff, that's a big miss. I think the Jarvan buff, these 2 lines, miss number 2. I think Rakan a little bit, Ashe a little bit. What was the other ones? Syndra here. The Ezreal double nerf here a little bit. The Vayne a little bit here. And then the Jhin. Those are the big ones. Oh, and then the Riven Victor probably didn't need to happen because of the counters. So, and so the end result has been a meta where, like, clearly at surface level, everyone's like, Jin, Shaco, GG, game over. Thankfully, what we're also seeing, though, and this is another good example, is the meta is shifting, right? Like, as solved as everyone thought it was, the meta is shifting. We're seeing, Soju's winning games with Jinx and Rebel comps. We're seeing Saint push the meta with the Bard, and then the late game 5 cost stuff, like the P.E.B.A. comp. Honestly, most of the Darkstar players in the tournaments the last 2 days haven't been doing great. It's not to say they can't win, because we've definitely seen the Xerath Janna comps and some late game comps do well. But I really don't think it's as solved as everyone's making out to be. So, but yeah. So in the end, a lot of cool takeaways, and I think what you'll see, we'll talk about it more in the patch 10.15 rundown. But what we're going to see is a lot of nudges to put things on track. But at the same time, we're also trying to be a little careful because, as we see, the meta is already shifting. For example, I'll tell you right now in PBE, there is a 10 mana buff to Urgot. Probably going to pull it because Urgot's doing well. He probably doesn't need that 10 mana buff. So, all right, that's going to do it for this. This has been a new experiment in something I want to try, patch post-mortem. If you thought this was useful, let me know, and I'll do this again more often. But yeah, that's going to do it for now. Take it easy.